Hello, hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome to Tutorial Tuesday. Woohoo.
Yay.
Welcome. We'll just give a minute or so just to let everyone in, and then we will be on our way because we only have 30 minutes. So just to make sure everyone's in the right room, this is shadow stitch and stitch marker short rows. So shadow stitch, and also known as Japanese stitch, Japanese short rows, which is the stitch marker short rows. So
yeah, so
hopefully everyone's here for short rows because that's what we're doing tonight.
Okay.
Yay. I just want to remind everyone before we start, it is a tutorial, so we don't have a lot of time. If you do have questions, if you have questions or anything,
I don't know, I know how it works on mine.
Right, maybe most people are muted when they come on, but if you want to go ahead and keep yourself muted, question, that'll be great.
Yeah. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Suzanne will be minding the chat while I am talking, hopefully not too fast, because I get very excited about short rows. Because, you know, it's knitting related.
I want to be excited about short rows.
Right?
You will after this.
And the more you know, I'm always wanting to learn new stuff. So it's always exciting. And it's exciting to teach too. All right, so hi everyone, and welcome to Zen Yarn Gardens Tutorial Tuesday. I am Anik, and I am a rep up here in Canada. Actually, I'm the only rep up here in Canada. And joining us tonight is Suzanne Nielsen, who is our rep out in California for just a few more weeks, hopefully. For a little bit. And Roxanne is hiding out, but she is here. She's paying attention. Hi, there's her hand. Hi. So we've got a hand for Roxanne tonight. And let's jump right into our short rows. So we'll follow the sign that's there and start with a shadow stitch. So we can jump to my hands and hopefully we will be okay. So I'm just going to scooch over here. Still here.
And as you get started, if anyone has questions, put them in the chat and I'll try and answer those or get Anik to answer them.
Yep. Alrighty, so both of the techniques that we are learning tonight are interchangeable with the wrap and turns. So there's nothing that you need to add, nothing that you need to count. You can perfectly interchange them without thinking twice about anything, because we like stuff that we don't need to think about. So jumping right in, shadow stitch. So a shadow stitch is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you are going to be creating a shadow to the stitch. Why it's called a shadow stitch. Yeah, okay, bad joke. So say my pattern says knit to X before or X after your stitch. Then you've got make your shadow stitch or make your double stitch. This is often called double stitch as well. So first step on the knit side, I'm going to be creating my stitch, my shadow, into the stitch below. So if everyone can see here, I've got the stitch here, which if I was knitting normally is the one that I would knit into, but I'm going to be creating my shadow in the stitch below. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop that stitch up onto my needle. As you can see now, I've got the regular stitch and the one below. And I'm going to knit into that stitch. Carefully taking it off so that I'm not touching the regular stitch. And I now have a second stitch coming out of that same bottom one. Now, obviously this is big and stretched out because I'm yanking everything and trying to make it as big as possible. It's going to be prettier. So once I've got that stitch created, I simply transfer it to my working side. So as you can see now, I've got two little stitches, two leading legs coming out of the bottom stitch. And that is all that is required for a knit side. So what do I do now? I turn my work. I can give it a little tug to make it nice and tight if I want, if I stretched it out a lot. And I'm going to start purling. No need to slip, no need to do anything. I'm just going to purl until my pattern tells me to stop and to create another shadow stitch or another double stitch. So purl side, who here hates purling? Raise your hand. Most of us do. Why do we hate purling? Because the movement is bigger. So it takes more time. It's a little bit more awkward. We often learned how to do it after knitting. So we're not quite as comfortable with it. So what's going to happen on a purl side? It's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable. Why is it going to be more uncomfortable? Because we've got an extra step. Extra step. It's a really complicated one, I'm telling you. I'm going to transfer my stitch. That was the extra step. That's it. That's all. So once again, purl to wherever your pattern tells you to do your short row. And your extra little step on the purl side is you are going to start by slipping the stitch to your right hand needle.
So
Then
Nick,
we're going to do.
Is this the stitch that it says wrap and turn? Is that
Yes, this would be the stitch that
wrapping
if you're
and
exactly, if your pattern is written for a wrap and turn, this is the one where it would say knit to 9 stitches after your stitch marker, wrap and turn. This would be your wrap and turn stitch. So what have I done? I've slipped it just like if I was doing a wrap and turn, but instead of wrapping and turning, which I would have done that, I'm going to go knit into the bottom, the stitch below the one on the needle, just like we did on the knit side. So in order to purl this stitch, you see how I'm coming from the front, and I'm going to raise that stitch up. Is that clear?
Yep, looks great.
There we go. And I'm going to delicately purl it because we are on a purl side. Now you see how now I've got the stitch that I slipped and the stitch that I just worked. We're going to delicately pop that off because we don't need it anymore. We have worked it. And just like on the knit side, I now have 2 legs coming out of the same stitch. Ta-da! So there is your double stitch on the purl side. Now, again, we are on the purl side. So we've got that little extra step that we did when we arrived. That little extra step we have to undo before we leave. So what am I going to do? I'm going to transfer both of these back to my left-hand needle. And we are done. So next step, turn. You can give it a little tug and you see how we've got, it almost looks like a little heart, little V coming out of the stitch. So we've got the regular stitch and its shadow. Ta-da, there we go. That was a purl side. So fairly simple. Now we do have a little bit of time, so I'm going to show you the knit and the purl once more, and then we are going to see how to resolve both of these knit and purl shadow stitches. So once again, on the knit side, nothing, no extra step or anything to do. I'm simply going to go into the stitch below, pick it up so that I can knit it. And before you ask, yes, when you're comfortable with this, you don't need to pick it up anymore. You can simply knit into the bottom if your yarn is not as splitty as mine. So you can just knit into the bottom stitch and then stick it. You always want the stitch and its shadow to be together. Just like Peter Pan needed Wendy to sew his shadow to his feet, you want your shadow with your stitch. You want your shadow to stick to your feet. There we go. So quickly, one last time on the knit side, I go into the stitch below, raise, knit, delicately pop that one off, and then put my shadow with my stitch, just like Peter Pan. Once that's done, I turn because I'm done. And I purl to wherever my pattern tells me to purl, which in this case, we're going to stop. Yes, there's a question.
There's a question. Just asking about what can cause holes in this method, if I just, as you're talking, can you make sure to talk about what times to look out for that could cause a hole?
Basically, you're plugging the hole by doing this.
So if a hole, like someone was asking that they had a pattern and holes developed on the purl side, or on the
if
purl
holes develop
shadow
on the
side?
purl side, it's probably because you forgot your little extra step.
Okay, and maybe you're going to do that when you resolve things too.
Exactly, because when you resolve is when the hole disappears.
Okay,
Basically. So on the purl side, hopefully this will answer a question or two.
Yep.
We've got that little extra step. Purl side, not many people like it. Remember, there's always that little extra step. So what's my extra step? I'm going to slip my stitch first. Step one. Step two, I'm going to go get the stitch below, raise that one up. You see how I'm going from the front? And I'm going to go purl that. Now, I am holding the stitch that I slipped with my index finger here. It's just a question of comfort so that it doesn't slide off while I purl my shadow. There we go. Now, just like Peter Pan likes to be glued to his shadow, this one is already glued to its stitch. Now, remember that little extra step that we transferred it to our right needle? Well, we now need to transfer it back to our left needle because it's been worked, it's done. And there we go. Now do try when you're transferring it back to go through the center of the stitch so that you're not twisting your stitch, which means you go through not here, not the back, right through the center. I don't know if that's clear, right there. You don't want it to twist. You don't want to change the order of the stitches. So once that's done, I turn. And once again, I've got my stitch and its shadow. And now to resolve, because we need to resolve these beautiful short rows that we have now created. Again, it is not difficult because once you get to your double stitch, your shadow stitch, you're going to knit this as if it was a knit two together. Poop, done. So we get to see it again. And my double stitch. Now see how you can't miss these. You absolutely cannot miss them. You can't accidentally knit beyond the hole. You can't knit beyond your wrap. You can't miss it. So there it is. Knit both the stitch and the shadow together. And you're done. Knit to the end of the row or to wherever your pattern tells you. And there you go. So we've got, not very pretty because I haven't resolved the other side yet. So they're kind of all smushed in there. But we will look at that once it's done. So quickly going to purl to our purl side short rows. Now, again, this does not change anything, whether you're a picker or a thrower, the technique remains the same. It's just whichever side you're holding your yarn on. So to resolve your purl side, exactly the same as you did your knit side, you're going to purl the two together, the stitch and the shadow. Doop, done. Love this technique.
Mhm.
And once again, the stitch and its shadow, they're coming out of the same stitch. It's hard to miss. Purl them together and you're done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, if there's gentlemen present, is shadow stitch short rows. So we now have
If this
thing coming
is
out of
there
my
ever a time, is there ever a time you wouldn't use this stitch or this method?
There really isn't. It resolves just as well whether you're going in the round or flat. So there really isn't a time when I wouldn't use it. I like it in ribbing. I like it on I'm just thinking the French term jersey.
Yeah, just some
Stockinette.
questions like you know, we actually, did we record the session where we did both like the German short row and compared to this one?
You mean during the Vogue demo lives? I think we did.
Yeah,
Yes.
did do a session, compared them, so that might,
yeah,
that and get posted maybe, because we had a question about, you know, how does it end up different than the German short rows?
The end result of all short rows is to plug that hole.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's a question of comfort. It's a question of you know, what you think looks best in the weight of yarn that you're using. Sometimes even the color. If you're doing two colors, sometimes, you know, a certain technique will be better than another. So
the
really,
only time we also got like the question why you would use the wrap and turn anymore, and we did see like wrap and turn actually looked good in garter stitch.
It's the one that looks best. An unresolved wrap and turn is the one that looks best in garter by far. All right, so moving right along because we're going to be short on time.
Yeah.
So we're going to go back to my hands and we are going to look at the stitch marker short rows now. Now, stitch marker short rows are very similar to, they are similar to wrap and turns-ish. I mean, kind of, not really. No, forget that. They're not similar at all. I find them nicer than wrap and turns because they're a lot tighter than wrap and turns.
While you're getting there, do you know who invented shadow short rows, or when they came to be, or have they been around for a long time?
Who invented them? That I don't know. Who popularized them? I think she calls it the fish lips kiss heels.
Oh, who did
she wrote that ginormous pattern, or it's actually a technique for sock knitting. Which, because the shadow short rows on heels it's a very easy technique and it's a very effective technique. Is it as nice as a stitch marker short row heel? In my humble opinion, no, but it's easier. It's less manipulation. So there we go. All right, moving right along to our stitch marker short rows. Now, again, this one is interchangeable with wrap and turn. So you're going to knit to wherever your pattern says knit to X after your stitch marker or whatever to the center. And what you're going to do is, instead of wrapping and turning, you're going to take your locking stitch marker. Please, please use a locking stitch marker. Very important. And you're going to stick that locking stitch marker right on the yarn. Now you can see where I'm going with this. You don't want to have to cut your yarn. So please use the locking stitch marker. So what I did is I put my locking stitch marker on the yarn. Nothing else. I'm going to turn. And my stitch marker is just going to hang there. All nice and docile. Now, I do like to slip my first stitch, but it is not necessary. So I slip my first stitch and I've got my locking stitch marker just hanging out here, being all cool. And I'm going to purl. That was the short row, by the way. That was it. So I'm going to purl to wherever my pattern tells me to purl to. And then if it says, in this case, knit 6 and wrap and turn. Well, instead of wrapping and turning, I'm going to take my trusty little stitch marker here, and how convenient, I've got 2 different colors. And I'm going to put it right onto my yarn. Lock it into place and pop it down. So it's just hanging out there, being all nice and cool, just like the other one. I'm going to turn because this one has nothing, there's no extra step on the purl side yet. Haha. As we build on the suspense of how do we resolve it. So again, I like to slip my first stitch. I find it gives it a little bit of a smoother join, but you do not need to do this. So you can either slip or you can knit the stitch. It's quite fine either way. The important thing is that you want your stitch marker to lay flat on the back side here. That's the important part. Everything else, superficial. And then I'm going to continue knitting all the way, or not quite all the way, because I don't want to knit beyond my stitch marker here. Well, at least not without resolving it. So we're going to pretend that we're doing another stitch, another short row. Short row is the word I'm looking for right here. So handily enough, I've got another orange stitch marker. Look at that. So again, on the knit side, just like on the purl side, first step, nothing extra. My stitch marker goes on the yarn. I turn my work.
Now, Anik, would you ever choose to use this one over shadow short row?
Yes.
Or you would? Okay.
I would. The main reason why I choose this one is I find it makes a nicer heel.
Okay.
It's a little bit more
the
delicate.
fiddliness of it is worth it, maybe in some cases.
I find for a sock heel, to my tastes, yes, the fiddliness is definitely worth it. So while we were talking, I was purling up to wherever. Stitch marker goes on the yarn and right up to, yeah, I don't have enough stuff to work with here, so not quite wide enough. So I put my stitch marker on the yarn and I put it right up next to the knitting. And if I want, I can knit and my stitch marker is locked in. You see how they're kind of hanging out there? They are locked in. So we just happen to be where we already are to resolve our knit side. So as you can see, I've got an orange stitch marker hanging out here below this stitch right here. I also have a big gaping hole right here. So this is the hole that I want to plug. Not complicated. There it is. So what am I going to do? I'm going to knit all the way to the stitch marker. And I'm going to knit the stitch that's on the side of the hole. Well, sorry. There we go. Now I've got my stitch marker over here. And what am I going to do with this and this big gaping hole that I need to plug? So I'm going to take that stitch marker and look what's happening as I pull it. Oh, look at that, a stitch. I'm going to go pick that stitch up, put it on my needle. And just like Peter Pan and his shadow, I'm going to knit them together. Big gaping hole, gone. Yay. So, oh, look, I have another big gaping hole to plug. Fortunately, I set up my stitch marker. So we are good to go. So I'm going to knit the stitch right where my stitch marker is.
Do you always use stitch markers, or once you get good at this, do you just go find that little loop?
You can. I find it just takes more time.
Because you can just use the stitch marker to pull it up anyway.
Exactly. Because instead of going and digging around for it, I just pull and there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So onto the needle it goes. Now you can take this off if you're feeling confident.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I did on the first one, you can just leave it there and take them off after. The
Mm-hmm.
important part is that once you've pulled up that extra faux stitch, let's call it, because it's not actually a stitch. The important part is that you knit it with the stitch that is actually on the other side of that gap, because
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to close that gap. And there we go. Big gaping hole gone.
Nice. Yeah, that does look really seamless.
They are quite lovely. Especially once you get a little more familiar and a little bit more at ease with the technique. You're not pulling quite so much, so everything stays nice and tight and even, and they make an absolutely stunning heel.
And we did have the question too. These are the same as Japanese short rows.
Yes, they are Japanese short rows. I just call them stitch marker short rows because, well, they're stitch marker short rows. So,
and then you remember to get your stitch markers, right?
exactly. So to resolve on the purl side, now again, show of hands, who hates purling? Yeah, there we go. Extra step.
Mhm.
So again, I'm going to purl all the way to the gap, and I'm going to purl the stitch before the gap. Purl it. Bloop. So as you can see, it's the stitch with my stitch marker right underneath. I am going to purl it. Boop, done. Here's the extra step. I could just raise it and purl it with the stitch on the other side of the gap. However, if I do that, I end up with this part that's going to show on the right side. It's not going to be very pretty. You want it to be pretty on the right side. So we have an extra step. Extra step, I'm going to slip my purl stitch that I need to knit, that I need to purl before raising up my stitch marker, which I'm going to raise up onto my left hand needle. Now, just for teaching purposes, I'm going to leave that stitch marker there so that everything is clear. Now I've got my faux stitch and I've got my real stitch, which I slipped to the other needle over here. Now I'm going to need to slip that back so that I can purl the faux stitch and the stitch together, just like Peter Pan and his shadow. And purl those two together. Big gaping hole, gone. Yay. So once again, since I've got this second one that is just so conveniently right next to the first, we are going to resolve this one as well. Now see, the big gaping hole is here. So I'm going to knit right up to the gaping hole. So right up to my stitch marker. And because I'm on a purl side, I've got that little tiny extra step, which is to slip first, raise it up onto my left-hand needle, and then place my slip stitch back onto my left-hand needle. So I've got my stitch and my faux stitch in order so that when I purl them together, keeping that out of the way, what happens is that on the right side of my work, we see nothing but beautiful stitches.
Nice.
So that was the Japanese short rows, also known as stitch marker short rows. And yes, once it's done, feel free to take off the short row, the stitch marker.
And show it to us so we can compare the two.
Oh,
because they're both on that
yeah.
piece.
So
Right?
we have here obviously this is very tightly worked on big yarn, big needles, and I was stretching everything out. So we've got the shadow stitches here. I'll show you the actual short row is right there.
Mhm. So it does make that little stitch pulls a little bit more.
Not usually.
Okay.
When you start
get
getting a
better
little
at
bit,
it.
yes, because I was pulling in order to be very clear in the movement.
Uh-huh.
So I was yanking it quite a bit out of whack.
Okay.
And here we've got the Japanese short row, which is nice and tight. Yes, it is fiddly, but it is
more.
beautiful. It does just wonders for short rows. So yes, I'm only 1 minute over time.
Yeah, good job. We have a couple questions. Let's see.
Yes.
Let's see. Let's see. Oh, one person asked if you could purl through the back of both stitches to get the same effect instead of doing that switcheroo.
No.
Then you would twist the stitch, so you'd have to be moving
You
it
end up
anyway.
twisting the stitches.
So you might as well
yes,
just
it would go to the back, but then you end up with a twisted stitch. So.
yeah. You could untwist the stitch and then do it if you really wanted to, but it's worth it to just
it's worth just to slip and then pick it up. It's going to be easier than slipping and then slip, because yeah.
yeah. And then also we answered in the chat too, but we are recording this session, so you can go back and look.
You can go back and watch. And don't forget that there is also a discount for all of you that you can use on the Zen Yarn Garden website, and it is short rows, one word.
Yay.
So what was the
Way
tutorial?
to enable, guys.
Short rows.
We are good enablers.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We just love yarn. So there we go.
But it's recorded, so we'll be posting that. And yeah, it'll get emailed out. But
yeah. And don't forget that there is the discount code that gives you 20% off everything, including our knit-alongs, which are coming up. A whole bunch of really fun ones.
Yes.
So all the knit-alongs, if you want to order the yarn as well, you can do the knit-along and the yarn and everything, and it includes the pattern. And you get your 20% site-wide, and the 20% discount short rows is good for 48 hours. So I'm going to be an enabler and say, hop to it. Any last questions before we go tonight?
Actually, I'm lying. What is the yarn right underneath the sign? The bottom, that beautiful blue purpley with a little poke of red sticking out. Yep.
Let's see. What colorway is that? Focus.
Oh, can't see.
Too glaring.
Peacock.
Oh, it's
Peacock.
so pretty.
Peacock. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
And super fine
that is a good
fingering.
one.
It is a good one.
Okay.
You're welcome.
And off I go with short rows.
Yay!
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a great
everybody.
evening. See you next Tuesday.
Yay.